Zalara, an alien woman feared by every species in the galaxy, stood alone on the barren world she called home. Her reputation was terrifying. Stories of her strength and ruthlessness were told in whispers across countless planets. She had destroyed entire fleets and laid waste to cities, her power unmatched. When the galaxy spoke of Zalara, they spoke of destruction, death, and despair. No one dared to come close to her, not even the bravest of warriors. She was a force to be reckoned with, and she preferred it that way. For years, Zalara had been exiled to a lonely, desolate planet. It was a place where no one came, a planet where only silence reigned. Zalara found peace in her solitude, the endless expanse of empty land offering her the one thing she longed for. No one. She didn't have to fear betrayal, and she didn't have to answer to anyone. The galaxy had abandoned her, and she had embraced it. But then, one day, everything changed. A loud crash echoed through the silent planet. Zalara's sharp hearing caught the noise from miles away. She stood up, instantly alert, her powerful muscles tensing. She was ready to defend her territory, whatever or whoever dared to intrude. When she arrived at the source of the crash, she was met with a sight that surprised her. A human ship, broken and smoking, lay on the ground. The human crew had barely survived the crash. They were scattered around, injured, and terrified. Most of them ran as soon as they saw her, their faces pale with fear. Zalara was used to this reaction. In fact, it was the one thing she could always count on. Everyone feared her, everyone ran. But one human remained. Unlike the others, he didn't flee. Instead, he slowly rose from the wreckage and stood his ground. His clothes were torn, and blood stained his shirt, but there was something in his eyes, something that didn't show fear. The man was calm, his stance relaxed, as though he was facing an everyday challenge. Zalara narrowed her eyes, studying him. He was young, human, and very different from what she expected. Most humans would tremble at the sight of her, begging for mercy, but not this one. He stared at her with a mixture of curiosity and determination. "You're not afraid of me?" Zalara asked, her voice deep and commanding. Her words carried weight, echoing across the barren landscape. The man didn't flinch. "No," he said simply. "Why should I be afraid of you?" Zalara was taken aback by his response. She had never met anyone who didn't fear her, at least not to this extent. The others, even the strongest of warriors, had always feared her. They had trembled at her power. But this human, he was different. For the first time in years, Zalara felt a strange sensation, something she couldn't quite place. Curiosity, respect, she wasn't sure. But something about this human intrigued her. She had to know more. "Who are you?" she demanded. The man straightened, wiping the blood from his face. "Marcus," he said. "I'm just a human, but I'm not afraid." Zalara's piercing gaze never left him. She studied his face, wondering if he was lying, but something in his eyes told her he wasn't. He was telling the truth. And that truth would set the stage for an unexpected journey, one where Zalara would learn that not all humans were like the others she had encountered. The question remained, why was Marcus so different? What was his purpose here? And more importantly, what did this human want from her? For the first time in a long while, Zalara wasn't sure what would happen next. Zalara watched as Marcus stood there, his expression calm and steady. She had seen fear in the eyes of countless beings over the years, but not in this human. She took a step closer, her boots crunching on the dry, cracked earth beneath her feet. She was taller than him, more powerful, but still, Marcus didn't move an inch. His eyes didn't even flicker. "You should leave," Zalara said, her voice still cold and commanding. "This planet isn't safe for you. Your ship is gone, and so are your crew members. You're alone now." But Marcus didn't seem worried. "I've survived worse," he replied. His tone was calm, even a little amused, as if Zalara's warning was nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Zalara was taken aback. She wasn't used to humans, or anyone, for that matter, talking to her this way. Most beings quivered in fear at the very thought of her, yet Marcus seemed unfazed. It made her curious. Why wasn't he afraid of her? "I've faced dangers before," Marcus continued, as if he could sense her thoughts. "But I don't run from them. I don't back down." Zelera felt a shift in the air. She had always prided herself on her strength and the fear she instilled in others. But Marcus wasn't afraid. He wasn't backing down. It was unsettling, and Zelera wasn't sure how to react. The silence between them stretched, thick with tension. Zelera's mind raced as she studied the human before her. He wasn't a warrior. His clothes were simple, torn, and bloodied from the crash. Yet there was something about him, something different from the others she had encountered. His eyes were full of confidence, but there was something else there too. He wasn't just brave. There was a depth to him that intrigued her. "Why didn't you run?" Zelera asked, her voice quieter now, more curious than before. Marcus tilted his head slightly, looking at her as though she were an interesting puzzle. "Why would I run from you?" he asked. "You're not the monster everyone makes you out to be." Zelera's eyes narrowed. "You think I'm not a monster?" She almost laughed at the idea. She had earned her reputation over countless years after all. She had fought, killed, and destroyed entire civilizations. She was the nightmare of the galaxy. But Marcus wasn't laughing. He was serious. "No," he said, "I think you're just misunderstood. Everyone is terrified of you because they don't know who you really are. But I'm not like them. I want to understand." Zelera was taken aback again. No one had ever spoken to her like this. Even the bravest warriors she had encountered hadn't dared to speak to her with such calmness and resolve. She felt a strange sensation stir within her, something unfamiliar, something that made her feel uneasy. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Zelera wasn't sure how to respond. Marcus wasn't like the others. He wasn't afraid of her, and that made her uncertain. There was something in him that she couldn't quite place, something that made her want to know more. But what did he want from her? And why did he believe there was more to her than the monster the galaxy saw? Zelera took a step back, eyes still locked on Marcus. "You don't know who I am," she said, her voice cold again. "And you don't want to." Marcus didn't back down. "I think I already know more than you think." Zelera felt a strange twist in her chest. She wasn't sure what it was, but she felt an unexpected urge to find out more about this human. "Then prove it," she said. "Stay, if you think you can." Marcus smiled slightly, as if he had just been given the challenge he was waiting for. And in that moment, Zelera knew that this encounter was far from over. Zelera studied Marcus, feeling a strange curiosity rise within her. For someone who should be terrified, he had an almost unsettling calm. Most beings she had encountered, whether alien or human, would cower in her presence, yet Marcus stood his ground without fear. He wasn't a soldier, nor a warrior, but there was something about him, a quiet strength that she couldn't ignore. They continued walking side by side across the barren landscape. The planet was desolate, with not a single sign of life, except for the occasional flicker of movement in the distance, something large, possibly dangerous. But Marcus didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. His eyes were focused on something far beyond the horizon, as if he had already made peace with the dangerous world they found themselves in. "So, what's your plan?" Zelera finally asked, breaking the silence. Marcus glanced at her, his face unreadable. "Survive. Survive." Zelera repeated, raising an eyebrow. "You're just going to survive. Isn't that what we all do?" He answered, a small smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "I've survived worse. I've been through hell and back. This is nothing new." Zelera was taken aback. She had heard stories of humans, of their resilience, but this man, this human, was different. There was no desperation in his eyes, no panic. He was calm, focused, And surprisingly, he wasn't looking for a way to escape. Most beings would have run for their lives by now, but not Marcus. He was here, choosing to stand and face the danger head-on. Zelera had never met anyone like him. "How do you survive?" she asked, her voice softer than before. Marcus looked at her for a long moment, as if weighing her question carefully. "I adapt," he said simply. "I learn from everything around me. It's not always easy, but it works. I face threats far worse than whatever's out here." Zelera wasn't sure what to make of that. "I don't understand. You should be terrified of me." Marcus shook his head. "You're not what they say you are. You're more than just a monster. I see it in you." Zelera stopped in her tracks, her gaze narrowing. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've done." "I don't need to," Marcus said calmly, his voice steady. "What matters is what you choose to do now." The words hit her harder than she expected. Zelera had lived for centuries, shaped by war and survival, her hands stained with the blood of enemies. She had never known anything but the harshness of the galaxy, the fear she instilled in others. And yet, here was this human, so sure of himself, so confident in his belief that she could choose a different path. It made no sense. She had never been given that choice. Her life had always been dictated by power and violence. It was what had kept her alive, what had kept her feared. But Marcus was different. He didn't see her as a monster. He didn't see her as an enemy. He saw something else, something she couldn't quite name. They continued walking in silence, but Zelera's thoughts were no longer on the dangerous planet they were trapped on. Instead, her mind was on the strange human beside her. What was it about him that made him so different from everyone else? And why did his words linger in her mind, even after she tried to push them away? Marcus wasn't afraid, and that, more than anything, unsettled her. The sun began to set, casting long shadows over the rocky terrain. Zelera and Marcus made camp for the night, a small fire flickering between them. As the night grew darker, Zelera found herself thinking more about his words. Could it be true? Could she, the feared alien queen, really change? Could she find something in herself that Marcus had already seen? For the first time in a long while, Zelera wasn't sure of what came next. But one thing was certain: this human was going to be a part of her journey. And for some reason, she couldn't bring herself to walk away from him. The fire crackled between them, casting warm, flickering shadows on the rocky ground. Zelera sat cross-legged, her glowing eyes watching the flames. She had been through countless battles, faced enemies who were far stronger than her, and yet none of it had prepared her for the strange feeling that was building inside her now. It wasn't fear. It wasn't hatred. It was something else, something unexpected. Marcus was sitting across from her, his eyes locked on the fire as well. He seemed lost in his thoughts, but Zelera could sense something else in him, an alertness, a quiet tension. Even here, in the middle of nowhere, on a hostile planet with nothing but each other for company, Marcus wasn't relaxed. He was always paying attention. "You're not like the others," she said, breaking the silence. Marcus glanced up at her, his expression softening. "I'm not like what others expect, maybe." Zelera nodded slowly, unsure how to explain what she meant. "No one ever looks at me the way you do," she murmured, almost to herself. "Everyone sees a monster, a killer, but you don't." Marcus didn't answer right away. He simply studied her, as though trying to understand her more deeply. Finally, he spoke. "Maybe that's because I don't believe everything I hear. I've seen people judged for what others think of them, without ever being given the chance to prove who they are. I'm not here to judge you, Zelera. I'm here to know you." The words hit her harder than she expected. She had spent her life being defined by the expectations of others. As an alien queen, as a feared warrior, her entire identity had been built on power, violence, and fear. But Marcus, he was offering her something she hadn't experienced before: understanding, acceptance, and maybe even the possibility of change. Zelera shifted her gaze toward the horizon, where the last rays of sunlight were disappearing. The night was closing in, and the planet seemed even more desolate now. In the past, she would have welcomed the darkness, embraced it. But now, with Marcus sitting next to her, she felt an unusual sense of calm. "I'm not who I was," she confessed, her voice quiet but firm. "I've done terrible things. I've hurt so many people, for reasons I don't even understand anymore." Marcus didn't speak immediately, but his gaze was steady, unwavering. He didn't seem shocked, or afraid, or even angry. He just looked at her with the same calmness he had shown from the start. "I know you've done things you regret," he said softly. "But that doesn't mean you can't change. People are more than their past actions, Zalara. I believe that." Zalara swallowed hard, feeling a lump in her throat. Was it possible? Could she change? Could she find something in herself that wasn't just about survival and fear? Could she be more than the monster everyone saw her as? She didn't know the answer. But in that moment, with Marcus sitting across from her, the possibility felt real for the first time, and for the first time in a long time. Zalara wasn't afraid of what might come next. She looked into Marcus's eyes, searching for something. There, in the depth of his gaze, she saw something new. It wasn't pity. It wasn't admiration. It was trust. He trusted her. Zalara had always believed that trust was something that had to be earned through power and strength. But now, sitting with this human who had shown her nothing but kindness and belief, she wasn't so sure anymore. Maybe trust wasn't about strength. Maybe it was about something deeper. And for the first time in her life, Zalara felt like she was ready to try to be something more. Something different. As the night settled in around them, Zalara allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't beyond redemption after all. The stars stretched out above them like endless diamonds, shining brightly in the night sky. Zalara sat quietly, her thoughts swirling, unsure of how to move forward. For the first time in years, she was feeling something she hadn't expected: hope. The hope of a new beginning. The hope of change. But could she truly change? Marcus sat beside her, his calm presence grounding her in the silence of the moment. He didn't rush her, didn't press her to speak. He simply existed with her, letting the quiet speak for itself. In his company, she felt different. Not like a monster, not like the queen of a brutal race, but just a person. The wind picked up, rustling through the alien trees around them. The planet they were on was harsh, with twisted landscapes and dangerous creatures lurking in the shadows. Yet, sitting there with Marcus, Zalara almost forgot the dangers around them. The danger that her people posed. The danger she had caused. She glanced at Marcus, wondering how he could be so calm, so at ease, when they were surrounded by such a threatening world. She could tell that he wasn't ignorant of the dangers. They had encountered several dangerous creatures already during their journey. But he never seemed afraid. Not like the others who had feared her upon their first glance. He had taken her in stride, as though they were equals. Zalara broke the silence, her voice hesitant but clear. "Why do you trust me, Marcus? After everything I've done, after everything I've been, why do you still choose to be here with me?" Marcus turned to her, his eyes thoughtful. He didn't look at her with pity, or fear, or judgment. He looked at her like someone looking at a puzzle they wanted to solve, with curiosity and determination. "Because I believe in people's potential," he said simply. "I don't care about the things you've done in the past. What matters is who you want to be now. And I see the change in you, Zalara. I see it in the way you act, the way you think. It's not about who you were. It's about who you can be." His words cut through her, like a blade of truth. She had always seen herself through the eyes of others. As a weapon, a queen, a monster. But maybe Marcus was right. Maybe she could be something more. Maybe there was a part of her that was capable of change. But was it possible for someone like her to truly change? Could she erase the blood on her hands and the weight of her past? She didn't know. But the thought of trying felt less terrifying now. The idea of having a chance at redemption, of building something better, was tempting. She had never considered it before. All her life, she had been defined by the violence of her species and the role she played as their queen. But now, sitting beside this human who saw her as more than a monster, she felt a spark of something else. Something she couldn't quite explain. "I want to believe that I can change," Zylura confessed, her voice quiet but filled with determination. "I don't want to be the person I was." Marcus nodded, his expression softening. "You don't have to be." The words were simple, but they carried so much weight. Zylura felt something stir within her, a flicker of hope that had never existed before. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't beyond saving. And maybe, with Marcus's help, she could find the strength to change. The night grew quieter, the stars shining more brightly than ever before. Zylura didn't know what the future held, but for the first time, she felt that she was ready to face it. Whatever came next, she wasn't alone anymore. And that made all the difference. The days on the planet passed slowly. Zylura and Marcus continued their journey together, exploring the unknown lands and facing countless challenges. Zylura had never imagined that her path would lead her here, side by side with a human, trusting him in ways she hadn't trusted anyone in a long time. But as the days went by, a bond formed between them, one she hadn't expected, and yet now couldn't imagine being without. The terrain they traversed was harsh and unforgiving. It wasn't a place for the weak. Jagged cliffs, dark forests filled with strange creatures, and rivers that surged with dangerous currents. Everything here was built to test even the strongest. And yet, Zylura found herself starting to trust Marcus more than anyone else. On this particular day, they found themselves at the edge of a deep chasm with no bridge in sight. The only way across was a narrow ledge, barely wide enough for one person to walk across. The wind howled, sending gusts of sharp air over the edge, where the ground dropped away into nothingness. Zylura looked at the ledge with hesitation. She had crossed dangerous paths many times before, but this was different. She could feel the tension in the air, the weight of her past, and the uncertainty of her future pressing down on her. She knew she couldn't do it alone, but something told her that if she trusted Marcus, they could make it across. Marcus looked at the ledge, then back at her. He saw the doubt in her eyes and understood. They had faced many dangers together, but this felt like a different test. He didn't say anything at first, only took a step closer to her. "Trust me," Marcus said, his voice calm but filled with the quiet strength she had come to rely on. Zylura took a deep breath, her heart pounding in her chest. The narrow ledge seemed to mock her, daring her to step forward. She wasn't sure she could do it. The fear of falling, of failing, was real. But then she glanced at Marcus, standing there with unwavering confidence. He wasn't afraid. Not of her, not of the ledge, not of the dangers around them. He believed in her. For the first time in a long while, Zylura let go of her fear and took a step forward, following Marcus's lead. Her first footstep on the ledge was shaky, but she didn't stop. She kept moving, placing one foot in front of the other, focusing on the sound of Marcus's steady footsteps ahead of her. The wind howled louder as they made their way across, but Zylura didn't let it distract her. She kept her eyes fixed on the path ahead, trusting Marcus to guide her. Every step was a battle against her own doubts, but she kept going. She had to. Halfway across, a sudden gust of wind struck, and Zylura lost her footing. Her heart skipped a beat as she teetered on the edge, her body swaying dangerously. For a brief moment, she thought she might fall. But before she could react, she felt a strong hand gripping her arm, pulling her back to safety. "Easy, I've got you," Marcus said, his voice low and reassuring. Zylura took a shaky breath, her heart pounding in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered, still trying to steady herself. "Don't worry. We're in this together," Marcus said with a smile, giving her a reassuring squeeze. The rest of the journey was easier, but the test wasn't over yet. As they reached the other side of the chasm, Zylura felt a sense of accomplishment she hadn't expected. She had done it. She had trusted Marcus, and together they had overcome the danger. It was a small victory, but to Zalara, it meant everything. For the first time in years, she felt like she was more than just the queen of a violent race, more than just a weapon of destruction. She was starting to feel like someone who could change, someone who could do better. And that, in itself, was a victory. The days seemed to stretch out endlessly as Zalara and Marcus continued their journey. Together, they had faced countless challenges and made it through each one, but the bond between them had deepened, and with every passing moment, Zalara began to wonder just how much further this path would take them. The alien queen, once cold and distant, was starting to feel a warmth she hadn't expected. She was beginning to trust a human in a way she had never trusted anyone. On this day, they found themselves in the heart of a dense jungle. The trees towered above them, their leaves thick enough to block out much of the sun, casting the path in shadows. Strange, soft sounds echoed from all directions, but the air felt strangely still, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. Zalara was cautious. This place didn't feel right. The usual sense of danger was heavier here, and the silence was unnerving. She glanced at Marcus, who was scanning the area with sharp eyes, his hand resting on the weapon at his side. He seemed just as alert as she was. "This place gives me the creeps," Marcus said in a low voice, breaking the silence. "I know what you mean," Zalara replied, her voice steady. "Stay close. Something's off." They moved forward cautiously, each step measured. Every rustle of leaves, every distant sound, made Zalara tense. She couldn't explain it, but the jungle felt like it was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. As they pushed deeper into the jungle, the air grew thick and humid, and the ground became soft and treacherous beneath their feet. The path ahead seemed to get darker, the shadows deeper. Zalara's senses were on high alert. She could feel something dangerous lurking just beyond the edge of her vision, something she couldn't see but could feel pressing in on them. Suddenly, there was a rustling in the bushes ahead, followed by a deep guttural growl. Zalara's heart skipped a beat. She turned to Marcus, who was already drawing his weapon, his eyes scanning the jungle. "Get ready," he muttered. Before Zalara could react, a massive creature lunged from the shadows. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. The beast was covered in thick, dark fur, its eyes glowing red in the dim light. Its claws were long and sharp, and its teeth glistened like daggers as it roared and charged straight at them. Zalara didn't hesitate. She had fought countless battles, faced enemies more terrifying than this, but this creature was different. It was fast, stronger than anything she had encountered on this planet. She leaped into action, raising her arm to defend herself, her mind racing for a plan. Marcus, however, was already a step ahead. He fired quickly, the blast from his weapon striking the creature's side, but it barely slowed down. The beast roared in fury, turning its attention to Marcus as it swiped its claws at him. "Marcus!" Zalara shouted, rushing forward to help. She moved faster than she ever thought possible, using her strength and agility to dodge the beast's attacks. She grabbed a large, sharp rock from the ground and hurled it at the creature's head, stunning it for a moment. It was enough time for Marcus to reload his weapon, and this time, the shot hit the beast square in the chest. The creature staggered back, growling in pain, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it let out a final roar of defiance and charged at them again. Zalara knew they couldn't keep fighting like this forever. They had to end it. With quick thinking, she used the environment to her advantage, jumping onto a nearby tree branch, swinging around it, and landing on the creature's back. She drove her knife into the creature's neck, and with one final cry, it collapsed, lifeless. The jungle fell silent again. Breathing heavily, Zalara stepped back and looked at Marcus. He was covered in dirt and scratches, but he was alive. They had survived. Again. "We make a good team," Marcus said, his voice filled with both exhaustion and admiration. Zalara nodded, a small smile tugging at the corner of her lips. Yes, we do. For the first time in what felt like forever, Zalara allowed herself to relax, knowing that together they could face whatever came next. The jungle had fallen quiet once again, but the air still felt thick with tension. Zalara and Marcus stood side by side, their breath coming in slow, steady gasps as they surveyed the area. The creature they had just defeated lay motionless at their feet, its body already beginning to fade into the shadows of the jungle. Marcus wiped the sweat from his brow, his eyes focused on the path ahead. Zalara, still alert, scanned the area around them. She could sense something was off, but she couldn't put her finger on it. The threat of the creature was gone, but the feeling that something more dangerous was waiting for them still lingered. "We need to move," Marcus said, breaking the silence. "It's not safe here." Zalara nodded, though she didn't feel any safer knowing that they were leaving the danger of the creature behind. The jungle still felt too quiet, too still. Something in the air seemed to shift, like the very ground beneath them was shifting its allegiance. As they moved deeper into the jungle, Zalara couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. Her senses were on edge, and she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder every few seconds. The thick trees and foliage around them provided ample cover for anything that could be hiding, waiting for the right moment to strike. "Do you feel that?" she asked Marcus quietly. He stopped walking and looked around, his hand instinctively going to the weapon at his side. "Yeah," he replied. "Something's not right." Before either of them could react, a shrill, otherworldly sound echoed through the trees, a high-pitched, sharp cry that seemed to come from every direction. Zalara's eyes widened, and her heart skipped a beat. The sound was unmistakable. More creatures, and they were closing in fast. Without thinking, she grabbed Marcus's arm, pulling him toward a nearby cluster of trees. "Move," she shouted. They sprinted into the cover of the trees, ducking low to avoid detection. The jungle around them seemed to come alive with movement as the sound grew louder, drawing nearer. Zalara's mind raced. They had barely escaped the last creature, and now it seemed as though an entire horde was on their tail. Marcus glanced at her, his face tight with concern. "What are they?" "I don't know," Zalara replied, "but they're not like anything I've seen before." The shrill cries grew louder, and soon Zalara could see shadows darting through the jungle. They were fast, much faster than the creature they had just killed. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pulled Marcus deeper into the trees, trying to stay out of sight. They reached a small clearing, and Zalara quickly motioned for Marcus to stop. She held up her hand, signaling for him to stay quiet. They both crouched low, trying to remain as still as possible. The noise of the creatures was now deafening, and Zalara's heart raced as the shadows drew nearer. She could see the shapes now, multiple figures moving with lightning speed through the jungle. They were humanoid, but their features were distorted, almost alien in their movement. Zalara's instincts told her to prepare for the worst. Without warning, one of the creatures lunged from the shadows, its glowing eyes fixed on them. Zalara reacted immediately, pulling her knife from its sheath and throwing it with precision. The blade struck the creature's chest, but it didn't fall. Instead, it hissed, pulling the knife from its body and tossing it aside with a snarl. The creature's companions appeared from the shadows, surrounding them in an instant. Zalara and Marcus stood back to back, ready to fight. "Stay close," Zalara said, her voice low but filled with determination. Marcus nodded, his grip tightening on his weapon. "We're not going down without a fight." But as the creatures closed in, Zalara realized something terrifying. There were too many of them. This was a fight they might not survive. "Prepare yourself," Zalara whispered to Marcus, her gaze locked on the approaching creatures. And just as the first creature lunged toward them, a flash of light exploded from the trees, striking the beasts with blinding force. The creatures screeched in pain, falling back as the light pierced through the jungle. Zalara and Marcus barely had time to react before a figure stepped out of the shadows. A familiar figure. "Zalara, Marcus, get back," the voice commanded. It was someone they had both seen before, an ally they thought was long gone. "Are you insane?" Zalara hissed. "What are you doing here?" But the figure didn't respond. Instead, they moved forward, their weapon unleashing another wave of light, sending the creatures retreating into the shadows. "Get to the ship," the figure said. "Now. I'll hold them off." The ship's engine roared to life, the hum of its power echoing through the dense jungle. Zalara and Marcus rushed toward the vessel, their footsteps heavy against the ground, but the sound of creatures' shrill cries still haunted their ears. The figure who had helped them stood behind, firing bursts of energy into the darkness, buying them precious seconds. But Zalara knew they couldn't outrun the danger forever. "We have to go," Marcus shouted, his eyes wide with urgency. He was already inside the ship, gripping the controls. Zalara was just about to follow when she turned around, staring into the dark jungle one last time. The figure who had helped them was holding his ground, fighting off the beasts with an almost unnatural determination. Zalara hesitated for a moment, torn between leaving and helping. "Go, Zalara." Marcus's voice broke through her thoughts. "We can't wait any longer." Zalara took one last look at the figure before making her decision. She ran into the ship, slamming the door shut behind her. Marcus immediately began to power up the ship, and with a sudden lurch, they lifted off from the ground, leaving the chaos of the jungle behind. As the ship soared into the skies, Zalara couldn't shake the feeling that they had left something important behind. She turned toward Marcus, her brow furrowed in concern. "Who was that?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with questions. Marcus, focused on the controls, didn't immediately answer. Finally, he sighed and turned to face her. "Someone I thought was lost," he said quietly. "But it seems they found us again. And not just to save us." Zalara's confusion grew. "What do you mean?" Marcus hesitated for a moment before answering. "That person. They were part of the resistance. They were fighting the same enemy we are now. I don't know how or why they're here, but they're fighting a battle that we can't afford to ignore." Zalara's mind raced. Everything was happening so fast, and yet it was as if the pieces of a much bigger puzzle were beginning to fall into place. The creatures they had faced in the jungle weren't just random beasts. They were part of something far more dangerous, something coordinated. "I'm not sure I understand," Zalara admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I know we're not done yet. I can feel it." Marcus nodded, his expression grave. "We have to prepare. Whatever's coming, it's not just about us anymore. We're going to need help." Zalara glanced out of the ship's window, her gaze sweeping over the stars that stretched out before them. The vastness of space seemed endless, but for the first time, it didn't seem so lonely. She realized then that their journey had only just begun, and she wasn't facing it alone. "We'll find the answers," Zalara said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. "We have to. For everyone." Marcus nodded again, his eyes hard with determination. The quiet hum of the ship filled the space between them, but Zalara couldn't ignore the feeling that something much larger than the creatures they had faced was looming ahead. As the ship flew deeper into the unknown, the stars shining through the cockpit window, Zalara knew that the truth would be waiting for them, and when they found it, it would change everything. For better or worse, their fight had only just begun, and they would face it together.